In the second year of our marriage, I attended Jason G's race for the first time. As the cars zoomed by, Jason ran to the sidelines to Claire Chi, draping the medal around her neck. Amid the cheers, I joined the audience in clapping, smiling and wishing them well, only to receive a cold glance from Jason. I felt that it might be time to leave. To my surprise, Jason desperately searched for me and even stopped me in an alley one snowy night, throwing a pile of photos of the late pilot at my feet and demanding, "Sophia Shu, when you told me to be careful before the race, were you talking to me or to him?" Their distance got closer and closer, and at the last bend, Jason overtook his opponent. He won. The champion of the race was determined. As Jason parked his car steadily on the track, his friends rushed over to drape a gold medal around his neck. Without hesitation, he pushed through the crowd surrounding him and quickly ran towards a girl in a white dress nearby. He took off the medal and personally draped it around Claire's neck. The two exchanged smiles, and the audience erupted in enthusiastic applause and cheers, creating a lively atmosphere. The young race car driver and his gentle, beautiful girlfriend became the center of attention for all the photographers, who rushed to capture this wonderful moment. I sat in a corner of the audience clapping along, but was soon interrupted by a little girl beside me, who looked surprised and asked, "Sister, are you bleeding?" I was taken aback, and as I saw her busy looking for a tissue, I finally realized that blood was flowing from my nose. I used her tissues to wipe away the bloodstains, then lifted my head and, after a moment, slowly bent down again. As I looked down, I happened to catch Jason's gaze. Although the situation didn't look good, I still said to him, "Congratulations. Congratulations on his victory, and also for winning the affection of his beloved." His expression suddenly darkened, and he shot me a glance before quickly turning away. I didn't pay much attention to it. I refused the G family's driver and took a taxi home by myself. To my surprise, Jason came back home early instead of staying out all night. We finished dinner calmly as usual. I cleaned the medal he brought back and carefully placed it in the glass cabinet. Then, I handed him a divorce agreement. He glanced at it and sneered, "Are you planning to divorce me now?" I nodded. "Why? Was it because of what happened today?" He slammed the documents on the table. "Didn't anyone tell you that today's performance was very unrealistic?" He stared at me as if I were a clown. Should I show magnanimity or evoke sympathy? Just put away those tricks. That kind of behavior is really off-putting. I opened my mouth to say more, but in the end, I only repeated what I had already said. "I want a divorce. Then you can marry Claire." I added that out of kindness. He was displeased with my attitude, grasped my chin and said, "Didn't you hear what I said? Divorce. If you want to divorce me now, just be prepared to pick up trash on the streets. Who do you think will sympathize with you?" Jason was right. I had always been someone without parents. Claire is the eldest daughter of the Chi family, while I am just an ordinary child from a single-parent family. However, later on, a paternity test revealed that I am actually a child of the Chi family, and Claire is my mother's biological child. The kind of unbelievable plot that you usually see in dramas happened to me, which truly took me by surprise. Fortunately, the Chi family had no desire to have any connection with me, and Claire also wanted to maintain her comfortable life, allowing my mother and me to continue living our peaceful days. It wasn't until my mother passed away, and the Chi family's business ran into trouble that they brought me back and forced me to marry Jason. It's understandable that Jason harbors resentment towards me. He has always believed that I was the one determined to marry him, while the person he truly cared about ultimately chose to go abroad to avoid complicating our situation. If he genuinely wanted to help me, he shouldn't have driven Claire away 2 years ago. As I observe Jason's expressive face, I feel a rare twinge of sympathy. The truth is, Claire didn't really like him that much. Her reluctance to marry him stemmed from her desire to enjoy her freedom, and she couldn't bear to let go of the opportunity with Jason, which is why she came up with this seemingly win-win solution. But now that my first love has returned to the country and even took the initiative to watch Jason's game, isn't that a sign that she wants to rekindle their old flame? My 2-year marriage with Jason has actually never been very close. At this point, if I take the initiative to withdraw, even if Jason doesn't appreciate it, he should sign the agreement without hesitation. Why be so stubborn? It's one thing that Jason is unwilling to leave, but after a few days, Claire came looking for him as well. In fact, you can always be Mrs. G. She said while boiling water, that it's also nice to play around with him a bit. She crossed her arms and smiled brightly. I went abroad for 2 years just to confirm his feelings for me. Now it seems that the outcome is quite good. So sister, even if you hold this position forever, as long as his heart is with me, I can remain indifferent. I thought for a moment and mimicked Jason's words. No one told you that this performance seems unnatural, did they? Just as the water reached a boil, I took the kettle off the heat and splashed it directly onto her hand. The hot water hitting her skin produced a sharp, piercing sound. She screamed, tears streaming down her face, clutching her swollen hand as she ran into Jason, who was rushing over. Jason took a glance, seeming ready to confront me. I splashed some more water forward, causing it to splatter onto his pants. Jason stepped back, shielding Claire, and shouted angrily, Sophia, what are you doing? I held the water bottle and calmly looked at the couple in front of me. I said I wanted a divorce, and you accused me of being dramatic. Fine, I won't pretend anymore. I really can't stand you all. I want a divorce, is that okay? Jason seemed genuinely angered by what I said and drove me directly to the Civil Affairs Bureau. Are you both willingly getting a divorce? The staff member was a young girl who looked like she had just started her job and was startled by Jason's cold expression. I smiled at her and was about to say something when Jason suddenly pulled me up. We're not doing this, he said, and then turned to lead me to a large tree outside the Civil Affairs Bureau. I felt very calm inside, as I had known all along that he was just acting on impulse. The timing of the impulse was a bit too quick. I initially hoped he would be able to calm down after the paperwork was finalized. So, I asked him, you can still get married, you know? But he interrupted me impatiently, saying, do you have any idea how much trouble our families will face after the divorce? I wanted to explain the situation to them and clarify things with my friends. He looked at me, breathing somewhat heavily, and asked if I thought it was all that simple. I stayed silent for a moment, and replied that I didn't think it was simple. It was a bit cool under the shade of the tree, so I tightened my clothes and patiently said, whatever you need to do, I can cooperate with you. As long as we can get a divorce in the end, that's all that matters. His breathing became heavy, and he took a step forward, forcing my back against the trunk of the tree. I didn't expect Claire to come here. His tone was somewhat peculiar, sounding like a statement, yet also like an explanation. Yesterday was your first time watching me compete in person. I had noticed you long before, but then I looked at him and saw a strange expression on his face for the first time. It was indeed my first time seeing him live, but I had watched recordings of his previous competitions on my phone. He had always been very confident, even a bit arrogant, smiling joyfully on the field and openly accepting everyone's praise. What I liked most was when he took off his helmet just before the finish line, revealing a vibrant face in the sunlight. It really was strikingly similar, truly strikingly similar. However, now he sits under the tree in the shade, with a face full of frustration and hesitation that feels very unfamiliar to me. Could it be that he came to find me because he saw me? But Claire arrived and inadvertently brushed me aside. I couldn't help but chuckle at this thought. Jason furrowed his brow and asked me, irritated, what I was laughing about. I shook my head and told him it was nothing. I want a divorce, and I hope Mr. G can understand my decision. When he heard me call him that, Jason's expression changed, and he clenched his fists. After a long pause, he said that there was another competition next week, and he would only divorce me after it ended. I breathed a sigh of relief and agreed to his request. Just as I was about to turn away, he grabbed my arm and asked, don't you have anything to say to me? I felt a bit confused and didn't know what to say. Seeing his increasingly anxious expression, and wanting to prevent him from changing his mind, I thought for a moment and replied, I wish you victory. He was taken aback for a moment, then seemed to understand and let go of my hand. I actually didn't have time to continue the conversation with him, because today was the day I was scheduled for chemotherapy. I ignored him and took a taxi to the hospital by myself. After the chemotherapy, I felt dizzy and lay in bed for a while before I managed to get up and sit on a small chair by the window. The weather was beautiful today, the sky was as blue as the sea, and the clouds floated gently like sailboats in the blue sky. The doctor came into my hospital room and asked how I was doing. I answered absent-mindedly as he repeated his words, "If you don't have the surgery soon, it will be too late." "Miss Xu, what are you looking at?" I regained my focus and saw the doctor looking at me with concern. His eyes showed no impatience, but rather a hint of sympathy. I pointed to the sky and said, "I'm watching the trail left by the airplane." He also looked up and noticed a white line that cut straight through the clouds. The hospital is located quite close to the airport, so I often see planes flying by. I nodded in response and chatted with the doctor for a few moments, politely seeing him out of the ward. Then I sat by the window watching planes all afternoon, along with the long trails they left behind. It wasn't until the sky began to darken that I stepped away from the window and sent today's recording to Claire. "Miss Chi, this is what Jason mentioned to me today. His concerns about not being able to divorce immediately. I have already told him that I will cooperate with him to resolve this matter as soon as possible. I believe this issue might be more suitable for Miss Chi to handle. So, could you please also collaborate with Jason, alright?" A few days later, Claire stopped me as I was leaving the hospital. "What exactly did you say to him?" Claire frowned, no longer as calm as she had been last time. Why was he unwilling to get a divorce again? "That's why I suggested Miss Chi to cooperate with him, isn't it? I don't quite understand, sometimes it's really hard to gauge a man's feelings. But after secretly loving you for so many years, how could he possibly just give up?" I slowly moved closer to her, offering a slight smile. After all, it's been 2 years, even if he still had a sense of morality, he wouldn't have that kind of hesitation anymore, right? Mark G has been gone for 2 years now, hasn't he? Mark is Jason's uncle, and he passed away 2 years ago due to a stampede accident. I was surprised at how calmly I could say this, but Claire was startled. She tightened her grip on my hand and asked, "What do you know?" "I know that you two actually have no real relationship." I wearily lifted my gaze to meet her polished face and said calmly, "Perhaps I know a bit more than you think." I forcefully shook off her hand, causing her to instinctively lean back just as a truck drove past her. Jason immediately wrapped his arms around her waist and anxiously asked, "Are you okay? Did you get hurt?" He nervously took Claire's hand and noticed it had blood on it, but there were no wounds. Both of their gazes turned to my right hand, where I had mishandled things earlier, causing blood to seep from the injection site. Ever since I fell ill, my blood clotting ability had been declining, and I hadn't realized that the bleeding hadn't stopped. Jason paused for a moment, let go of Claire, and reached for my hand, but I turned sideways and avoided him. I had noticed him in the corner long ago. He probably found it amusing to see 2 women competing for his attention, which is why he only decided to show up now to help me. "Miss Chi, the night is long and dreams are numerous." I left 4 words with Claire, and when I saw her nervously clench her fingers, I walked away. Claire did not disappoint me. 3 days later, a signed divorce agreement was faxed to me. Meanwhile, I saw Jason's friends posting pictures in our social circle, congratulating him on finally marrying the woman he desired. When I saw the news, I was already on a plane flying to another city. My body was actually not well suited for flying. Although I tried hard to stay awake and look out at the clouds, I inevitably fell asleep. I dreamed of Mark. I haven't dreamed of him much in the past 2 years. His parents had him later in life, so he and Jason are actually only 7 years apart. On that day in my dream, I was at the airport with my mom when suddenly a group of tourists had an accident and we got separated. In an instant, I couldn't find her anymore. My mom suffers from dementia, and I don't really understand her condition either, let alone expect her to come looking for me. I went to the airport staff for help, my hands trembling as I helplessly listened to the announcements playing over and over again. Finally, a staff member excitedly pointed behind me. When I turned around, I saw a tall man in uniform holding my mom's hand, patiently talking to her. When he saw me, he smiled and waved to me through the crowd. "I had just seen you and your mother in the hall, so I had a bit of an impression." He handed his mother over to me and gently said, "You might not remember, but I was standing in front of you at that time. My clothes got caught, and you helped me untangle them." After he finished speaking, he noticed me pause for a moment and seemed to feel a bit awkward, so he added, "It was just half an hour ago, you should remember. Right?" Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, shining on his bright eyes, which reflected my image. I stammered in response, "No, I haven't forgotten." He looked at me, sighed, and took my hand, saying, "If you haven't forgotten, then why aren't you taking care of yourself? You're bleeding." I froze for a moment, seeing the numerous needle marks on the back of my hand, with bright red drops of blood continuously dripping, even getting on Mark's hand. I hurriedly withdrew my hand, wanting to help clean off the blood. But the next moment, Mark's face suddenly became blurry and disappeared. I jolted awake. The plane had already landed. Amid the pounding of my heart, I noticed the back of my hand was bruised and there was no bleeding. My phone screen kept lighting up with messages from Jason. "Where on earth did you go?" I got off the plane and called Jason. He asked me, "Where are you?" I didn't give him a specific address. I just said that I had left the city to clear my head. "Leave." He was furious on the other end of the line, demanding to know why I was leaving, but his words trailed off mid-sentence. Yes, he had forgotten that we were already divorced, and the agreement had been signed by him personally. Even when he was leaving, he reminded me to pack up the things I had left in the house. After some thought, he finally found a reason to attack me. I had already told the moving company to let Mr. G handle everything except for a few important items. I got into a ride-sharing car leaving the airport, and the scenery outside flashed by. I heard him ask, somewhat unhappily, "Don't you have anything you want to take with you?" I didn't quite understand why he cared, but I eventually responded, "Yes, I want the bracelet that Claire has." "Can you give it to me?" He was taken aback for a moment, not expecting me to ask such a question. After a while he replied, "Why are you still bringing this up? That bracelet was a keepsake from your uncle to her. How could it possibly be given to you? Given to Claire?" I smiled faintly. After Mark passed away, Claire took my place and became his widow, expressing her sorrow to the media every day. Claire is eager to take everything away from me, even something belonging to the deceased. She uses this as a self-justification to reject Jason's advances, which is really a win-win situation for her. You can ask for anything else but not this. On my phone, Jason seems quite satisfied with my response, thinking it's proof that I still have feelings for him. He doesn't want to give it to me because it's a keepsake from his uncle, and the only reason I want it is because of the emotional attachment it holds. "Sophia, today is my competition, so I won't need it." I easily interrupted him. In fact, I didn't really want anything, I was just joking. I hung up the phone and blocked his number. Then I went to the hotel I had booked. After resting at the hotel for 2 days, I set off immediately to the Shukong nursing home to meet someone. She was a caregiver who had previously worked at the Anyan nursing home where my mother stayed. 2 years ago, the nursing home had a fire, and she changed jobs to come to her current place. She warmly welcomed me and reminded me to pay attention to the weather getting colder, and to wear more clothes before I left. Indeed, the temperature outside dropped rapidly, and as I stepped out of the nursing home, the first snow began to fall from the sky. In December, at the end of this month 2 years ago, my mother vanished in a fire, just like the nursing home. I didn't expect Jason's appearance to be as sudden as the first snow. He appeared at the end of the alley, grabbed me, his eyes red-rimmed as if he hadn't slept for several nights. He threw a stack of photos down at my feet, his voice trembling as he questioned me, "Sophia, when you told me to be careful before the competition, were you speaking to me or to him?" The streetlight illuminated the photos on the ground. One featured Mark. There was also a picture of him on the plane, looking vibrant and smiling radiantly at the camera. Snowflakes landed on the photos and I picked one up, wiped it clean and asked Jason, "What do you think?" The following photos are all of Mark and me. At the airport, in the restaurant, at the amusement park, where we are happily smiling. I remembered Mark from the dream a few days ago, and this time under the light, I took a closer look at Jason's features. Sure enough, he didn't resemble Mark as much anymore. I felt a bit disappointed and lowered my head, noticing that Jason's breathing had become rapid, and his hand instinctively lifted. I calmly watched him, seeing his hands tremble slightly before he finally let them drop helplessly. I said to him, "Don't do that. You don't love me and I don't love you either. That seems like a fair deal. He leaned against the wall, looking at me. I might have been imagining things, but I even thought I saw a hint of moisture in the corners of his eyes. Yet, you still remind me to stay safe, come to watch my games, care for me when I'm sick and cook for me. His speech was a bit hesitant, and he suddenly fell silent again. I knew he finally understood that I wasn't doing all these things for him. Before each flight, I would help Mark tie his tie, then gently kiss his lips and remind him to be safe. Mark would press his forehead against mine, nod seriously and hold my hand tightly. We would kiss in the morning sunlight and then say goodbye. Now, seeing Jason's face full of pain, I suddenly think of Mark. He would never show such an expression in front of me. He was always gentle and steady, with a touch of pride and a hint of childishness. He would hold my hand and run with me on the grass, accepting my unease and fear, cradling my face and repeatedly telling me he loved me. Jason only showed a similar expression to Mark when he was racing, which is why I always paid attention to his races, and reminded him to stay safe before each one. It felt as if I could see another person's soul through his eyes. I didn't elaborate much and watched as Jason left, looking confused. There were more unexpected guests than I had anticipated. A few days later, my biological mother Claire's mother found me. She asked, "What did you do to Jason that makes him care about you so much?" In the quiet cafe, she elegantly stirred her latte, and I found the situation a bit amusing. Why is it always me, the one who is already divorced from Jason, being asked about this? Auntie, all I could do was get Jason to divorce me. I couldn't make him be with Claire. For the rest of the matter, you should ask your daughter. It's none of my business. She glared at me angrily and slammed her cup down on the table, clearly believing that I am inferior to Claire. Then she looked at me and suddenly sneered. I forgot. Your mother is no longer around, so there's no one to teach you a lesson anymore." "Oh." I coldly nodded, stood up, leaned closer to her, and finally it was Claire who last saw my mother. "Aunt, aren't you afraid that your daughter might be a murderer?" Her expression immediately changed, and she angrily replied, "What nonsense are you talking about? What does your mother have to do with Claire?" I straightened up and thought about it. Biologically, she was indeed Claire's real mother. The woman across from me suddenly chuckled, looking at me with pity, as if to say that I was Claire's true mother, not someone like her. She took a sip of her coffee and leaned back in her chair, looking at me with a relaxed demeanor, as if nothing my daughter did mattered, even if she really caused some trouble. The expression on her face was strikingly similar to Claire's, filled with contempt and a sense of superiority. Indeed, like mother, like daughter. My daughter could do as she pleased. I turned off the voice recorder in my hand. She was being cautious, and I couldn't make my intentions too obvious to avoid raising suspicion. However, these few words are already enough, because she doesn't know that her mother didn't actually die in the fire. She had passed away before the fire occurred. A week after Claire's mother left, Jason approached me again. But by that time, I was in a really bad state, leaning against the trunk of a tree and feeling extremely nauseous. In the end, I even coughed up blood. Jason appeared suddenly and insisted that I go back with him to see a doctor. He said he had obtained my medical records and that I could not delay any longer. I looked at him. His hair was disheveled, and his stubble was unkempt, which made me feel nauseous again, and I threw up. The side effects of the chemotherapy were unbearable, and Jason's reaction intensified my suffering even more. He supported me helplessly and asked me to walk with him. I asked him, "Will you marry Claire?" He fell silent again. I knew that the Chi family had been putting a lot of pressure on him lately. Claire had been enjoying her time abroad for quite a while, and since she was getting older, she was eager to find a stable marriage that would allow her to settle down while still enjoying life. Jason is a very suitable candidate. I noticed the hesitation on his face, and unwilling to say too much, I just gave him an address and told him to come find me there in 3 days. "I won't run away, just go to the place in 3 days, and I will go with you." I confidently deceived him, and 3 days later I arrived at that house. "Mr. Chun." I nodded at the man opening the door while gently patting the little girl's head in his hands. "Wendy has grown taller, hasn't she?" I said. "Miss Shu." Over the years, Older men often smile at me and ask how I've been lately. I smile back and reply, still the same as always. I handed over all the materials I had collected over the years, along with Mrs. Chi's recordings, to him. He took his time to read through everything and listen to the recordings. In the end, he covered his face with his hands and said, "I'm sorry." The words and voices seemed to take us back to that day when the fire broke out at the nursing home. Mark Pingan had just returned home from a flight when he received my call. I was crying very hard at the time, telling him that the nursing home was on fire, and that my mom was still inside. He kept comforting me, saying he would be there soon and told me to find a safe place to wait for him. But in the end, I didn't wait for him. That night was December 31st, and there was a New Year celebration on Nan Chau Road, where a serious stampede occurred. He saved a girl and 2 elderly people but was overwhelmed by the crowd. That night, I lost 2 family members. I couldn't understand why he chose to take South Bridge Road, when there was another route from his home to the nursing home. Even though South Bridge Road was closer, how could he choose such an obviously congested route? But Claire found me and threw a disc of surveillance footage in front of me. The video was from the security camera of a grocery store at an intersection. In the footage, Mark was holding his phone in one hand, listening to a call and glancing at the intersection. After hesitating for a moment, he ultimately chose to go the other way. This scene occurred while I was talking to Mark. "Sister, you might have been a bit flustered at that time and forgot what you said." Claire sighed and said, "From South Bridge Road, someone heard you say these exact words. It was to get Mark to hurry to the nursing home." Her lips moved slightly, but I couldn't hear her voice. However, I understood that she was saying that because you had lost your mother and Mark, I was already in great pain, and Claire's words only added to my distress. In the following months, I often lost my voice and frequently couldn't hear what others were saying. Nightmares haunted me, and I relentlessly felt guilty, replaying in my mind whether I had ever said those few words. Walking along South Bridge Road, I knew I hadn't said them. Or had I forgotten? "Sophia, stop lying to yourself, you did say those words." This sentence echoes in every corner of my life, making me feel there is no escape. In this dilemma, Mark looked at me and kept asking why I was being made to leave. It wasn't until I met that caregiver that things changed. She firmly told me that she was present at the time. Although I was flustered and my speech was not very coherent, I definitely did not say those things. The only possible explanation is that there was an issue with the surveillance system. I went to look for the grocery store owner again, but I was told that he had closed the store. I heard that the store seemed to have hit some kind of jackpot, becoming wealthy overnight and even stopping its business. The owner of the neighboring shop looked at the rental sign in my store with envy and told me this. Unable to bear it any longer, I fainted in front of his shop and fell, injuring my head and bleeding. After a great deal of effort, I finally found the owner of the grocery store and inquired about the surveillance footage. Before I could finish speaking, he knelt down and begged me for forgiveness. That day, a woman approached him, asking him to provide the surveillance footage from the store. She also requested his cooperation in altering the timestamp on the footage and insisted that he must not reveal any information. He was somewhat puzzled. The large sum of money she offered him didn't seem like someone planning something nefarious. It felt more like she was just trying to play a prank on her friend. He thought that these wealthy people must be so bored that they were throwing money at him. The footage wasn't from 9:27, but from 9:30. She wanted me to move the time forward. Mr. Chan said sadly that he didn't answer your call. It was that woman's call. He was deceived by her to go to Nan Chau Road. And I really don't know what happened. I stared blankly at Mr. Chan as he tightly held the little girl in his arms, his emotions running high. He saved Wendy, but he shouldn't have gone in that direction that night. I realized that it was my impulsiveness that aided that woman in deceiving you. I looked at the little girl in his arms and realized she was the one whom Mark had rescued that night. Ever since Mr. Chan learned that this man was his daughter's lifesaver, he felt very uneasy about Claire tampering with the surveillance footage. Mark's choice to head down South Bridge Road was not related to me. He merely inadvertently sheltered the culprit and pushed me towards the abyss along with her. I can't blame him. He, like that caregiver, said that as long as I was willing, he could serve as my witness. At that time, Claire had already left the country and flown to the UK. I strangely settled into a calm state, staying by Jason's side and quietly waiting for her return. What comforted me was that Claire came back before I faced any illness. For someone like me, holding the Chi family accountable required a decisive strike. Therefore, I was not impatient. I patiently stayed by Jason's side, gradually gathering evidence. The nursing home was burned down, and nothing was left behind. I searched for 2 whole years, looking for the female nurse, Mr. Chan, Mrs. Chi, and now Jason. He was standing in the stairwell, his gaze fixed on me as I came out of Mr. Chen's house, his expression complicated. I knew he had heard about what happened. Claire was responsible for my mother's death, which also indirectly led to Mark's death. I paused for a moment and added that he is also your uncle. I will definitely ensure that she faces legal consequences. My voice wasn't loud, and I felt a bit discomfort in my chest, but I still made an effort to articulate every word clearly. No matter where you are, you can't stop me. Jason smoked quietly, silently gazing at the ground. In the smoke, he stared at me vaguely, and suddenly let out a bitter laugh. He said that your willingness to marry me was merely to remind yourself that you have yet to avenge your uncle's death, and that you need to survive. In reality, you don't even have feelings for me as a substitute. I'm not even a substitute. I'm just a presence that brings you clarity and pain. Isn't that right? Jason is actually not foolish, on the contrary. He is quite clever. I married him not only because of my relationship with Claire, but also because when I needed medication to control my emotions, having a face similar to Mark's could momentarily bring me back to clarity. It constantly reminded me that my mother and my loved ones were still waiting for me. I had to pull myself together. As for the other feelings, I didn't answer Jason's question. He extinguished his cigarette and said to me, "I understand," before turning around and quickly heading downstairs. A few days later, a post suddenly appeared online, revealing that a wealthy young woman named Claire had made a thoughtless remark at a party abroad, mentioning a chat where she discussed having killed someone. She said, "What is it like when a person dies? I know, let me tell you, it's quite interesting." At first, I couldn't fulfill this request. When the post was first published, only a few people noticed it, and many believed it was simply an attempt to attract attention, not taking it seriously at all. Later, the poster recorded a video, publicly accusing Claire of intentional murder, and uploaded an audio clip in which Claire, after getting drunk, boasted in English to her classmates about her murderous deeds. This is the strongest evidence I have discovered in the past 2 years. The poster had been hesitant, thinking that Claire might just be talking nonsense and did not want to come forward as a witness. It wasn't until I sent her all the recordings of caregiver Mrs. Chi and Mr. Chan that she was forced to confront this horrifying reality. This revelation stirred up a great deal of public outcry, and the Chi family immediately noticed the public sentiment, beginning to take active measures to try to erase all traces of the incident. Strangely enough, the related content cannot be completely deleted no matter what, and instead it has intensified. I saw the heated discussions among netizens and decided to turn off my phone and head down to the basement. Claire was tied up in a chair, and upon hearing my voice, she struggled violently. I ripped off the tape from her mouth. The moment she had a chance to speak, she started to vent her anger at me, saying that the Chi family would not let me off the hook. I simply walked over and gently took off the bracelet from her wrist. She paused for a moment, then suddenly smiled in a curious way and asked me, "He loves you so much. Do you think he would be sad to know you've married his nephew?" I looked down, fiddling with the bracelet, and replied, "So what? When I was with Mark, you wanted to take him from me, yet he never paid you any attention. I am now divorced from Jason. Doesn't he want to marry you either?" She was indeed provoked by me and retorted, "You and your mother are truly disgusting. I feel sick just being associated with you. Your father wants to acknowledge you, but what right do you have?" After learning that I was a child of the Chi family, Claire's mother developed a strong dislike for me. However, Claire's father still felt guilty and secretly sent me things a few times. This made Claire feel a sense of crisis. She was afraid that I would take everything away from her, so she constantly created trouble for me and even started to pay attention to Mark. The more I care about something, the more she wants to destroy it. So when I found out that my mother was living in a nursing home, she immediately rushed over in my sister's name and sent all the caretakers away. That day, I unplugged all her tubes, originally just intending to make a joke and worsen her condition a little. I didn't expect her to be so frail. Before long, she lost consciousness. She sneered and said, "Then I can only set fire to let everything disappear." After the fire, Claire actually didn't leave. She was hiding in a corner, watching me anxiously call Mark. Just then her best friend posted a video in the group chat, saying that there were a lot of people on Nanchow Road, and it seemed like a stampede had occurred. She then made a joke. "He really cares about you. I originally told you to call him and ask him to rush over from Nanchow Road, but instead, you ran straight into the fire scene. He was so worried that he actually headed towards Nanchow Road. What bad luck to have such a troublesome woman like you around." I looked at Claire's confident expression and knew she was still fantasizing that the Chi family would protect her and help her leave safely. "Miss Chi, you're too easily angered." I ended the live stream in the corner while she looked at me with fear in her eyes. I understood that Jason would show this entire live stream to the public and the police. I pressed Mark's bracelet against my face. The cold metal made me feel even more alert. "I will make you pay the price." During a live broadcast, a woman who claimed to be a caregiver at a nursing home stated that she personally witnessed an elderly person suffocate to death after Claire left the room and the oxygen tube was removed. Another man also came forward, saying that the day after the fire, Claire approached him, trying to bribe him to alter the store surveillance footage, for reasons that remain unclear. The complex web I have woven over 2 years has finally ensnared Claire. The police broke in and took away the crying Claire. My use of this illegal method was clearly against the law, and they were preparing to take me away as well. Jason arrived quickly and got me released on bail within 3 hours. I hope to achieve a decisive victory, leaving Claire with no chance to fight back. Throughout this process, Jason and the G family were indispensable. Wealth and power provide such advantages. The first step out of the detention center brought me excruciating pain in my chest, and I coughed up a lot of blood. Jason rushed me to the hospital and pleaded with the doctors to save me, but it was too late. During my recovery in the hospital, many people came to visit me, including the nurse and my boss, who were willing to testify on my behalf. They all encouraged me to hang in there. However, only I understood that I had fulfilled my responsibilities, and it was time for me to leave. One sunny morning, I learned the news that Claire had been arrested for intentional murder. She will certainly face a severe verdict. Not only did she kill her mother, but she also caused the deaths of 10 elderly residents in the nursing home. Today, the truth has finally come to light, and the murderer has been brought to justice. Meanwhile, Mark, who was indirectly affected by this incident, seems insignificant and will soon be forgotten. My health is deteriorating to the point where I struggle to distinguish between people just like my mother. Sometimes I mistake Jason for Mark and ask him when he will come back. Maybe because he sees me getting anxious, Jason occasionally pretends to be Mark and talks to me, trying to cheer me up. One day, I insisted that I wanted to take a plane. "You previously mentioned that a proposal should happen on a plane. I've waited for so long, why haven't you proposed to me yet?" Mark helplessly frowned and said that he was not feeling well and couldn't take a plane. I didn't want to listen. I cried and made a scene, threatening that if he didn't let me go, I would go on a hunger strike and break up with him. In the end, Mark still allowed me to take his private jet. Wrapped in a blanket, I lay comfortably in the seat, feeling quite satisfied, while the noise around me suggested that people were busy preparing for something. In a daze, the real Mark came over and, as usual, told me that he had to go to work. As usual, I stood on my tiptoes and gave him a kiss, saying, "Stay safe." He smiled and stroked my head. Just as he was about to turn around, I grabbed his arm and said, "I want to go too." He looked at me helplessly, but I knew he would never refuse me. Sure enough, he took my hand side and said, "Okay, let's go together today." I beamed with joy and happily ran out the door with him. Outside the door were soft clouds like cotton candy. He and I laughed together and fell into the clouds, holding hands as I gently closed my eyes.